Right, so I'm here with ex-fellow student of mine and generally very cool person. Hello, Jocelyn.
Hello. You are also a very cool person. It's lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, cheers. So we got back in touch recently, didn't we? I was always a bit gutted that we kind of drifted apart after uni, and I think I always had you on Facebook, but I unfollowed everyone on Facebook. So, like, to stop using Facebook so much, I unfollowed everyone, so I never got a news feed. And then recently I navigated my way to you, I don't remember how, and saw your profile picture. And yeah, the comment I put was pretty much my response. I just commented it when I saw it, and the comment was, "Joe, you look hot, what the hell is going on?" Which I felt covered my response at the time. And yeah, and we got back in touch and we went from there. And that was my recollection anyway, and it's lovely to get back in touch with you.
You as well. And yeah, for context, by the way, in case that sounds odd to listeners who do not get the context there. Last time Dave knew me, I was looking and sounding like a boy, and now I less so, So when Dave saw a picture of me, I had been in the process of doing gender transition, as one occasionally does in this world. So hence why, yeah, that kind of makes sense. But yeah, I'm really glad you did. It's lovely to see you more. I knew Dave, during our time at York. I remember you always being very thoughtful and kind of surreal at the same time, which I think is a really nice combination. I think also I can see why that also lines you up well to do the work that you do, where you hold space for people.
Thank you.
You kind of allow the surreal to exist in its own way.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's nice of you to say. And it's been lovely. So yeah, to give this a bigger context, I suggested after talking or chatting online that we maybe do a podcast, because I got a bit tired of talking into a microphone because it all felt a bit artificial and weird talking into a room on my own. So I think this is a lot more comfortable already than me talking on my own in a room. And yeah, got in touch with yourself, with Jo, and she invited me down to Brighton for the weekend rather than us chatting on Zoom. So here I am in Brighton, having had a lovely weekend so far, and yeah, chatting away. So yeah, I know you said that you're happy talking about this, and I kind of want to be explicit that you've said that.
I have.
Before I jump into this. Yes.
I'm literally in a podcast studio.
Yeah.
I've consented.
But you're talking about like this topic specifically. Like I guess, yeah, when I saw the profile picture, and obviously I kind of filled in the gaps a bit, I was curious what your journey is, and I suppose I was curious about where you were at with all that, I guess, when we knew each other, if you had any inkling, or if it was a vague thing, or if you kind of knew, or I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I think obviously everyone has their own kind of version of their stories when you do the trans thing. For me, it was not one of these things where like I had a big revelation moment. I knew I was a girl from pretty early on.
Right.
I had told quite a lot of friends when I was younger, and they didn't really know what to do with that information. Neither did I. And when I, even in like sixth form, I was like signing my name Josie and doing like eyeliner and kind of all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I kind of lent more towards it being like a punky thing. So I was like, I've got like different, pink eyeliner, and I'm kind of doing this. And fortunately, that was around the time when like, emo was still new.
Yeah.
And
I think you did eyeliner at uni. I think that rings a bell.
I did. I was very happy to have at the time, socially acceptable reason to do eyeliner.
Yeah.
So I always had that, and then I kind of knew that I was, for context, this was like North Norfolk while I was growing up, and there wasn't really so much kind of media awareness of trans issues. The only real trans kind of associations I had, I think there was like a character on Coronation Street who was trans.
Haley.
I didn't know very well that storyline, but it seemed like it was quite sad from what I got of it. And there were a few films, and it was always very sad. And I just thought, oh God, this seems like the most just heavy, quite depressing, tinged in, guilt and oh my God, what's happening? And then maybe someone being beaten up, and it's like this constant parade of negativity.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I don't want anything to do with that, So yeah, in my own way, I was very conscious that I was like, no, I'm not a boy. I don't feel like one. I never have.
Yeah.
But I quite deliberately was like, well, it's not really an option at this point.
Because that was always like associated with just sadness and tragedy.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
You know, it was like there's no joy there. It was
Right.
just, it was either seen in like a really medical thing
Mm.
where it's like, oh, Claire, you're gonna do all this, you know, hospital stuff, and it's really intense, and people will hold hands and think about you as you do, or it's like this, you know, seedy kind of drag queen thing, and you know, it was never really seen as like just a joyful, someone is wholesome, happy, and just
Yeah.
living a good life.
Yeah.
So I think in that way, I very much picked up the media narrative about it, and I realise that now, like
Yeah.
quite how strong that was, and unpacking that has definitely taken some time too.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But yeah, no. So basically, and in uni as well, I found out that I'm something called XXY. So genetically, I have 2 X chromosomes,
Right. Okay.
and a Y one. And a lot of people who are XXY are very happily with a male identity, so it's not something that means that you're trans,
No.
but it's something which can affect brain chemistry, body chemistry, all this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And I think to me that made sense. I was like, cool, it's actually quite nice to have something kind of written down in a way that felt scientific, that gave me that thing. I realise now I didn't need that, but I think at the time that made me feel much more confident.
It was quite validating on a certain level, I suppose.
It was, and I don't talk about that very often because when I'm in trans circles, I don't want to make it sound like I think you need to have some medical.
Yeah.
It's,
There's an implication that if you read it a certain way, I
yeah,
suppose.
and it lines up with a certain type of narrative that I really don't like. But that is also in my story. That is part of it.
Yeah. It's part of you maybe becoming more comfortable with it in a time when that was something really uncomfortable for you.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
And so yeah, and in uni I told a few people as well.
Right.
But people generally seemed uncomfortable and didn't know what to do with it.
I like to think I think I'm a lot more aware of it because it's a lot more visible now than I guess it was back then, and I like to think I'd have been really good about it. And I certainly have never felt any kind of negative feelings towards trans issues or trans people, but I don't think I was very aware of stuff. I don't know what I'd have done with it, to be honest, back then.
I wasn't either.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the first trans person I met was at uni.
Really, yeah. Yeah, I think me too.
And so I didn't have any connection to it, really.
Yeah.
And nor did I really have much association with like the queer world either. And to be honest, I still don't that much. I kind of see my trans thing really more in a medical lens. I think that it gets put into the queer box because, we're quite a vulnerable group and we're very happy to have the support of queer folk. But in my own head, I don't see that as the same thing at all.
Yeah, I get that.
But no, so that was kind of it really. And then, told a bunch of people, never went well, relationships never went well.
Yeah.
And then eventually I got to the point, for various reasons I can go into if you want to, when I was like, why not?
It's up to you to the extent that you want to. I mean, I don't want to kind of push you in that direction if it's quite
No, it's
personal. I guess I was curious to know though, because I always felt like you were really... I was curious to see how this marries up with your memory of it, but I always felt that you were really unapologetically you, I guess. One of my first memories of you in halls was, I think you blasted out some Jane's Addiction and you were kind of jumping around your room, dancing like nobody was in the room, except people were in the room. And I just found that really free, and I was like, oh, yes, this is really cool.
I have that. And I think, I was raised as like a little homeschooler, and I'm quite happy to exist in my own little bubble.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't for lack of being confident. I think it was more an intellectual decision at the time.
Yeah.
And also probably one from just fear of loneliness. Like you don't know if you're ever going to have a relationship again. You don't know if people are going to be uncomfortable around you. You don't know what friends you're going to lose. And I have lost friends.
That's shit.
Well, in a way, but also...
I suppose you may have always... Sorry, I'll let you finish.
No, it's not great, but also, clearly not the best friendship.
I guess that's what I was thinking.
Funny thing is, when you transition, no one says that they're not going to be your friend because you're trans. There's always something else. And then when you're like a year into it, you look back and you're like, that's funny. I've had 5 different people who I've always gotten on with, some of them for decades, that all have suddenly had a show-stopping problem with me that have made them end the friendship.
But it's not you being trans. It's never been that.
It's never been
explicitly,
in quotes,
anyway.
me being trans.
Yeah.
But for some reason, very coincidentally, you lose a bunch of friends. And I realised that later on because I went a bit crazy and I was like, why am I losing so many friends? Am I a horrible person? Am I really like narcissistic and all this kind of stuff? And you know, I'm not perfect, but by looking at the correlation, you do start to realise that.
Yeah.
And fine, you know, it also does.
I'm sorry to hear that though. That's still, I know. Yeah, there's an element of like, well, this is me, and if they fall by the wayside, then okay. It may have never been a genuine. I don't know if that's what you were meaning.
Yes and no. I think sometimes there is a fairness to it that I think when you are trans, when you become a different gender than the one that you started out in the friendship as, it does change the terms of the friendship a little bit. Some people prefer being friends with women. Some people prefer being friends with men. Some people just feel more comfortable being friends with a certain gender, and that is legitimate, and I respect that. So in a way, it's quite validating if someone is like, actually, this doesn't fit my energy now. So there's that.
That's a really nice way of looking at it.
It's the nicest way I've got.
It's a very generous way of looking at it. But no, that's quite lovely actually. In a way.
It does suck, but also it's fair. It's their right to do that.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's kind of where I've come to that. Fair enough. Some people just don't want another friend who's a chick in their life.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So and then as far as the actual kind of decision too, it's a bit of a sad story. It was
to the extent you want to, obviously.
No, thank you. It's okay. I feel fine talking about it.
Right.
I think it's also nice to hear people talk about it who have happy lives.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a nice counterbalance to some stuff.
Yeah. I get that.
So I had a friend who I went to uni, I went to sixth form with. I lived with her. She was called Sarah, and Sarah was one of like the happiest, brightest people. She was like a musician. She played in like ska bands. She was a bit of a punk. She had like really cool like big black rim glasses and said like, yeah man, all the time.
Right.
And had like just the nicest energy in the world.
Yeah.
And she got stage 3 cancer. And she started we hadn't talked that much since we'd lived together a couple of years back, but I was still following her on Facebook and Instagram and stuff. And she started posting these videos on Instagram where it was kind of her cancer diary and talking about how she was feeling and the hope and the love that she had, because she had a husband and a child as well. And she did that all the way through, and it was just the most incredible vulnerability that she was doing, the stuff she was sharing, and the way that she was just so giving to everyone that knew her in terms of wanting to let them into her life, because she loved these people and she wanted them as close in her life as she could. And I think when I saw that, and when I kept on seeing it, I was kind of so overwhelmed with just how cool that was. You know, to really own it, to really be like, I'm going to let you into my life because I love you. And this is a pure act of, I want you in my camp.
Yeah.
And it's pretty hard to see that and not see your own stuff in context and be a bit like, you know what, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fine. So I kind of had that in the background, and I think I went out to a club at one point, and I was not dressed particularly. You know, I didn't, at the time you'd call it cross-dressing, I didn't really do that, but I was just looking quite femme. I had like, you know, thick eyeliner and kind of head on up.
Yeah.
And someone at the club asked if I was Lily, and I'd never met a Lily.
Right.
But the fact that someone had asked, are you Lily? I was just thinking, there's someone called Lily walking around right now who clearly I look enough like, who people are mistaking me for.
Yeah.
And that was the last straw. I was like, you know what? Fine. Lily, I don't know who you are. Maybe I'll never meet you. But clearly there's someone who looks enough like me.
Yeah.
And and then Sarah was the first person who I told. And
I was going to ask if she knew the impact she had.
Yeah, I told her.
Yeah.
And then she passed away within the same year.
Right.
But amazing person, and
sounds it.
Genuinely changed my life. Like her loveliness. That's kind of it's. I'm always aware that like it's such a
between her and Lily. That's
yeah. It is an inherently kind of self-indulgent thing to talk about this, but also it's actually nice because I actually haven't at all talked about it.
Yeah.
So it's That's nice.
Yeah. I don't find it, I mean, I guess sat in here with you, I don't find it self-indulgent because I'm just really interested.
Thank you.
It's a really interesting thing. And I guess partly, and because I know we talked and you said you're happy to talk about the trans stuff, I felt as though, I don't want to say it's important because I don't want anyone to feel any pressure to talk about anything in particular, but I feel as though it's good for people to just talk about their experience and to humanise themselves. And I guess one thing, as a person and as a therapist, I've often noticed is the discrepancy between trans people that I know personally and professionally who are getting on with their lives and the presentation of how things are, I guess, in newspapers and stuff like that. And I think it's just lovely to hear people's personal stories and how they're navigating these things and you know, feelings that they're maybe always been aware of, or maybe some people kind of are aware of feelings later on or whatever, and just trying to figure things out and live their lives as genuinely as they can and hopefully being accepted and respected and treated with dignity and so on. And I think maybe I'm rambling now.
No, it's nice. And like, I think there's such a negativity bias with trans stuff, obviously, in the media is just a garbage fire. But even so, a lot of the time when you do hear trans stories, it is rooted in like sad stuff and violence. And that is, of course, part of the world of being trans, but also a lot of joy is there too.
I was going to ask, what, I guess, since deciding to come out and to transition, like, has it been what you hoped it would be?
Oh, it's been amazing.
Yeah.
It's been amazing. Anyone who can do it safely, I strongly recommend. If you know that you're trans, you transition.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, once you start transitioning, there are support groups, there are people fighting for you, there is a mechanism in place to support you. Whereas when you know that you're trans but you're not coming out, there's nothing. You're just purely alone.
Yeah.
And I think that being able to have a team is actually really cool.
Yeah, that's a nice way. A team around you.
Yeah, and you also realise like you're probably stronger than you think you are. And also, to be quite frank, life doesn't last very long, you know, and the stakes, none of us are going to make it out of this game alive.
Yeah.
And part of that is just you let the chips fall where they may. You know, I feel very comforted that I know I didn't choose to be trans. I know that it's very much, I'm sure at some point there will be some physiological test that they can do, but to me it isn't an optional thing. Like if it was, I wouldn't do it because it'd be too difficult. The fact that it isn't, you just do it because it's the cards you were dealt.
Yeah.
You know?
You're kind of doing it on hard mode, but that's just what you've been given. I don't know if that's a good way of putting it.
I don't know. In a way, it's less hard mode now.
Yeah.
And now I just find it funny. And plus, you meet such amazing characters on the way. You know, you meet the kindest people. You meet just the off-the-wall people. And you get into these situations, which are just hilarious. And you're like, this is just... I'm so glad that for my one experience on Earth, I get to have this really interesting perspective on it. And I get to, you know, look after this human whose body I'm in, and I get to kind of see their story, and it's so nice to. I feel so lucky that I get to see this human story. Yeah,
you got a nice way of words. Like I kind of, there's a few times where I just kind of wanted to stop and just note how nicely you've expressed
really
something.
Sweet of you.
Yeah, this human body that you're in.
I think so.
I'm not sure if that's how you phrased it. Actually,
no, a little bit, because it's like I've got one job now. It's like to keep her alive and happy and healthy, and. Cool, okay. If my one job on Earth is to look after this human, I'm going to do a good job. I'm going to set myself to do a good job. And I feel proud to do a good job.
Yeah.
You know, she deserves it. So that's been a nice way of, having kind of a better relationship with myself.
Do you have any thoughts, if you want to go into this, on, I guess, that discrepancy that I mentioned? I've got ideas about it, and I guess I can share how I understand it. I can do that first, actually, and see what you think of it. Because my thinking is, I guess, trans issues, there's a visibility there now, more than there has been more recently, but there's a visibility maybe without there being that much understanding by a lot of people, and I guess that creates a gap, which certain media organisations thrive on, I guess, stoking fear, and I guess the high visibility, but a lot of people don't fully understand it. There's an opportunity to exploit that and to scare people and like other certain groups and to demonise certain groups, which I think a lot of the media kind of relishes and they really love doing that. And I don't know, I guess trans issues are just in a certain spot now where people are aware of it, but they don't understand it. And that's just prime time kind of space for that to be exploited. I don't know. I don't know if that's too simplistic or what, but...
No, I don't think it's too simplistic. I think visible minorities often are the ones that are picked on. And make no mistake, they pick on trans people because they want to pick on other people in the LGBT world. But trans people are often the most visible. And... it's a group that you can apparently get away with picking on right now. There's a lot of trauma in the trans community. Every single trans person has been through, a world that doesn't really know how to make that happen. It's a very counterculture thing, even being trans.
Yeah.
So it's a demographic of people who have experienced a lot of that. So often they're in a situation where, that they don't have the most stable life sometimes, especially early on. It can be very destabilizing. And so there's a lot of vulnerability there. And I think that it makes it a visible target. And, it's incredibly sad because, I've got news for you. We're not that interesting. I decorate my Christmas tree at my local church. I have hot chocolate in the park. I mostly want a cat. I'm not really out here to... redefine pop culture and to take away your right to... I don't even know what they say that we're trying to take away their rights to. But we're pretty boring. And I think that's why I always find it really interesting that, we get thrown in this culture war that's just insane. We're not interesting enough for it.
Yeah.
There are problems that are.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a visibility thing.
Yeah. I wondered also about, I guess, the extent to which it can stir people's stuff up. I can't remember if it's Judith Butler or someone who said, gender roles, people fitting into gender roles, that happens through pain, people policed in a certain way. And people then stepping out of that can stir up the kind of, from a personal perspective, I feel like I was policed quite a bit as a kid, not so much by my parents, more in the playground, behaving in a certain way, having emotions, you're not a proper boy for, I don't know, if you cry or have feelings and stuff like that. I internalised that quite a bit. I remember a point when I was in secondary school and there was, I don't know, I'd see someone on TV who was openly, not so much gay, but effeminate. And that stirred stuff up in me. It was almost like they were breaking the rules and they were getting away with it. And that's not fair. I've been policed heavily, so that I know now not to be anything like that. And then there's these people who are just flaunting the rules, breaking the rules. Some people who are just bailing out of the whole masculinity game altogether. And I remember it. I was 13, 14, I think, and it felt like a little injustice. And I don't know. I feel as though that's probably a lot to do with it, impersonally.
I think it's so on the money. It's so that people judge most what they judge in themselves. And if you've been policing yourself about something for a long time, there's a lot of shame there if you've suppressed your own kind of feelings too.
Yeah.
And exactly what you said, why do they get to break the rules? And I think you're completely right. I think there's a lot going on there about how we relate to our own sense of the people we want to be, the way that we police our behaviour, and also gender roles too. Really interesting one.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot being trans, because part of it is when you transition, you're thinking of all this, different things that could be part of your transition, but there is also a conversation there about stereotype, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to be a stereotypical version of a chick, of a femme or whatever.
Yeah.
And so how much of it is you, how much of it is learned behaviour from society, right?
Yeah, I think that's I've often wondered that. It is quite unnerving to think about, to what extent my behaviour as a man, to what extent is that something, I don't know, it's comforting to think that's an ingrained part of me, it's just the natural order of things, and I think a lot of people lean towards that because it's quite a comforting idea, that certainty, but I don't know. I don't know where the answer is. I don't know if anyone knows really beyond a certain point where stuff comes from.
No.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. My yardstick is I always think, would I do this if I was the last person on Earth? And I think, yeah, I would. And so there's nothing. And I think if there was anything that I was putting on, I wouldn't bother doing that if I was the last person on Earth.
Yeah, right.
So that's been the way that I've kind of found sanity through it. But no, it's a whole thing there about how you find comfort. And I'd be really curious about your story too. When have there been, what's your relationship been like to that sort of policing and to how you see your gender, like especially as you've gotten older?
I think throughout being a teenager, I was very concerned about. I don't know. It's hard. It doesn't fit into a narrative because I can always think of examples when I haven't been like this. But there was a period definitely where I was worried about how hard I was, like how good at fighting I am, who can I beat in a fight, and I think a lot of the time at school I was like looking at people in terms of a hierarchy of how popular they were. But there was definitely one time in my life when I was looking at it in terms of like who's the hardest, who could I beat up, who would probably beat me up, that kind of thing, which is obviously very gendered, I think. As I got older, I mean, being a therapist has been a big thing. It's been very good for me in a lot of ways because I can kind of explore my emotions in a way that, I don't know, just feels safe. It's expected and it's kind of socially validating and acceptable. But I really tuned into it when I became a therapist. I was like, oh my God, this is me. This is what I'm about. I love reflecting and thinking about feelings and stuff like that. There's never a thing for that. Like there was never. I used to love drama as a kid. I've got into drama a bit more recently. I've joined like a Leeds amateur drama group. It's the first time since I was a kid that I've got into drama. But I think drama was that for me as a kid. Year 7, 8 and 9, every week I'd look forward to the drama lesson. I think it was a way of exploring feelings in a certain kind of way.
It's really cool because I know there's a lot of discussion as well on like what is modern masculinity, what is the modern narrative for how men like kind of see their gender in a way.
Yeah.
And I think it's a fair question because like I don't know because I've never had any inkling to want to have that. So like
Yeah.
I'd be curious for you, like do you feel like there is a narrative to, I don't know, what is that for you?
I think, I don't know, those questions, they can irritate me sometimes. Like the questions about like, what does it mean to be a man
What does
nowadays?
it mean? What does it mean, Dave?
Like, I want to live my life and I'll reflect on my feelings and how I'm doing and my own feelings about things, and I'll respond to it as genuinely as I can and navigate things as genuinely as I can. I don't know where masculinity fits into that. I'll just do it as genuine as I can. If that's masculine, cool. If that's not masculine, then okay, I'm not masculine then. If I just bat the whole thing away and just listen to how I feel and navigate as congruently as I can through my life based on how I feel, then I don't know. You know what? I was a tutor. I was a counselling tutor a few years ago. And I read some book about masculinity. And I think I asked this question to the class, like, what is it to be a man nowadays? Masculinity, you know, where are we? And a guy said, why can't people just be themselves? Why do they have to kind of gauge themselves on this spectrum on any level, really? What's the point in, why do we need to redefine masculinity? And I've never thought of an answer to that. I didn't have an answer in the class, and it's been on my mind since, and I think I don't actually know, if that makes sense.
That does make sense.
Yeah.
I mean, different people have different theories. I always find it interesting and quite telling, and this is maybe quite a judgmental thing to say, how like when people have a baby or something, they really want to know the sex really soon. And then they really want to get, you know, a bunch of stuff that lines up with that, whether it's toys or clothes or decorations. And it almost feels like the baby is this blank canvas, this blank slate, but that inherently brings a lot of uncertainty. You don't know what this creature is going to be like. You don't know what their life is going to be like, if they'll be happy, if they'll be sad.
Yeah.
So in my head, it feels like people often cling to, well, at least we know the sex. That makes it feel more like we have an element of control.
Yeah.
And part of me wonders, do we sometimes lean towards like the idea of femininity or masculinity as a kind of a substitute for a sense of control in like a chaotic world?
Yeah.
That like, I'm a masculine guy, therefore my life makes sense because I like to do this. Or,
give some guidelines. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm into football and I've always been into football, and there is some comfort in that. It is quite, I don't know, heteronormatively blokey type thing to do. There is some comfort in that, to be in those guidelines in certain areas.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely relate to that, and I think there might be some truth in that, definitely.
But also like we're creatures of, you know, we're pack creatures or whatever it is. Like, you know, we like to feel part of a group. That's a comforting thing. And I don't think we can always feel like the lone wolf all the time. I think that would get exhausting and psychologically draining.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think like with that, what that student said, I think ultimately it's true. Like we don't. Why should we? Well, I think we should because some people feel as though we should. Like it's kind of something that almost like feeds on itself. Like if people are comforted by having some guidelines for masculinity that fits in today's world, then I think that's probably something we maybe should think about. But then I think it should be a guideline rather than a prison. I think as soon as people are boxed in, like exactly what I said earlier, like I think people should be able to, live their truth and listen to their feelings and live according to them to the greatest extent possible. If these kinds of guidelines, whether it's femininity or masculinity, is stopping a person from being able to do that, then I think it becomes a bit of a problem. But yeah, if it's helping people feel a sense of belonging and it's helping people just have some kind of stabilizers on a bike, then I don't see a problem with that.
Yeah, it's a time save, isn't it? It's sort of, you fill in lots of, if you hear that someone's like a feminine person, it fills in a lot of gaps.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, they're probably like this kind of thing, or they might dress this kind of way, and it's a shorthand, I guess.
Yeah. I don't know does that feel like a natural place to end, or is there anything else we want to talk about?
I don't know. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, me too.
And thank you just for giving, kind of a space for me to just kind of broadcast a bit of that stuff. I haven't actually spoken about that in public, so it's nice to kind of just, I don't know, open my mouth and let the words fall out.